I had just come home, and unlike every other day, my wife's warm, honest, welcoming face was gone. In its place were tears rolling down her cheeks, her mouth trembling, her sobs so broken she could barely speak. My daughter stood right there looking at me with a shrug and a shake of her head. She said she did not know what had happened to her mother. She thought her mother had changed. Maybe it was just a symptom of old age. But with her evasive eyes, her slightly emotionless face, and my years of work experience, I realized something was being hidden. As I often did, I checked the security cameras out of habit, and I was completely horrified by what appeared on the screen. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. I'm Douglas Mercer, a man who spent his whole life dealing with crime and the ways to punish it. But that was my job out there. I never imagined something like this would happen inside my own beloved home. My wife Patricia was sitting on the floor. Her back was leaning against the refrigerator. Her eyes were empty as if she had just seen a demon. Shards from her favorite tea set were scattered everywhere. They glittered under the light like tiny blades. My daughter Brittany stood there with her arms crossed. There was not a trace of pity on her face. She looked at her own mother, as if she were a broken toy. She told me in a calm, emotionless voice that Patricia had fallen by herself, that she had completely lost her mind. But with the instincts of a man who had hunted criminals for years, I knew something was wrong. I saw the red mark on Patricia's wrist. That was not from a fall. It was the mark of a powerful grip, of force, of coercion. I felt the blood in my body turn cold. I realized I was standing in the middle of a crime scene, and the number one suspect was the child I had once loved the most. Before everything became clear, I chose silence. I had to observe carefully, because if it was true, then I was facing blood relatives who had turned into demons. This was serious. Love alone could not solve it. I needed a detailed plan and a fitting ending for the person who had hurt my wife. That was the silent vow of a man who had been the pillar of his family for 40 years. My professional habits were buried deep in my subconscious. A tiny device the size of a pea among several others had become something I could not do without. What I mean is a mini camera I had placed inside the smoke detector last month when I was planning a long fishing trip. It was the wisest decision of my life, and also the most heartbreaking one. Because what appeared on that 4K screen that night completely changed my definition of family, children, and love. Prepare yourself, because the truth you are about to hear will make you never look at your loved ones the same way again. I knelt down on the kitchen floor beside Patricia. The shards of the tea set were scattered everywhere around us. In forensic accounting, we have a golden rule. Numbers never end up in the wrong place unless someone intentionally moves them. I began analyzing this scene the way I would analyze a fraudulent tax return. According to the laws of physics, if my wife had accidentally dropped the tea tray, the broken pieces would have gathered in one corner. But they did not. They spread outward from the center of the room. That meant the tea set had been smashed downward with tremendous force. I took Patricia's hand. She shuddered. I gently pulled up the sleeve of her sweater. My heart tightened when I saw the bruises shaped like fingerprints on her wrist. Those were marks of restraint. Someone had held her tightly while someone else did the smashing. I looked up at Brittany. She was still standing there with that artificial expression. She kept repeating that her mother had become confused, that she had destroyed everything herself in some sudden irrational rage. At that moment, Todd walked in. My son-in-law. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his smile made me sick. He did not ask about his mother-in-law's condition. Instead, he began lecturing about a place called Golden Oaks, a luxury nursing home that costs tens of thousands of dollars every month. He said it was the best solution for Patricia. He said we needed to protect her from herself, but I saw the urgency in his eyes. It was the look of a man being chased by debt. Todd did not want to save Patricia. He wanted to remove her. He wanted to clear the path to reach the trust fund I had spent years building. I quietly watched the two of them working together, a betraying daughter and a greedy outsider. They thought I was an old man past his time. They thought a retired accountant only understood dry numbers. What they did not know was that I was recording everything in my mind. Every lie, every trembling gesture, every wound on my wife's skin. They were all debts. And in the ledger of Douglas Mercer, no debt is ever erased without payment. I could feel the anger boiling beneath the calm surface I was showing them. I helped Patricia stand up. I guided her back to the bedroom. I told them I needed time to think about the nursing home proposal. I needed them to leave so I could take the next step in my plan. The moment the sound of their car faded into the distance, I pulled out my phone. I connected to the hidden camera management app. The camera concealed inside the smoke detector in the kitchen had recorded everything. I took a deep breath before pressing play. I knew what I was about to see would be poison tearing my heart apart. But if I wanted to destroy these demons, I had to face the raw truth. Truth leaves no room for mercy. Truth is a death sentence for every feeling I once had for them. The house that once felt like a home now felt as cold as an interrogation room. I sat across from Brittany and Todd in the living room. On the table were the folders about the Golden Oaks nursing home that Todd had just thrown down. He was advertising it like paradise. But all I could see were invisible bars. Brittany began to sniffle. She used a silk handkerchief to dab at her fake tears. She said she could not bear to watch her mother collapse like this. She said caring for her was becoming too much of a burden for me. I stayed silent. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had worked tirelessly to raise her. To send her to private school. To pay for her lavish wedding to Todd. Now those hands were trembling. Not from old age, but from the rage I was forcing down. Brittany stepped closer and placed her hand on my shoulder. A gesture that should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt like a snake crawling across my skin. She whispered that I should rest, that she and Todd would take care of everything. Todd picked up the conversation with the tone of a man speaking from above. He began listing numbers about medical expenses. He talked about the need for a legal guardian to manage the family's assets. He said that with Patricia's condition and a power of attorney would be necessary. He called it protection. I called it an armed robbery, without a gun. He was trying to strip away control of our lives inside our own home. I looked straight into Todd's eyes. He did not look away. Greed had already blinded him. He looked at me the way an accountant looks at an unnecessary figure on a balance sheet that needs to be erased. Brittany was busy playing the role of the heartbroken daughter. She did not realize that her expensive makeup could not hide the cruelty in her eyes. Every word they spoke cut into me like a blade. But I kept my face calm, giving them no opening until the moment everything would end. I asked about the bruises on Patricia's wrist. Brittany froze for 1 second. Just 1 second. But for someone trained to recognize the signals of a lie, that second felt like an eternity. She said maybe Patricia had hit the edge of the table during some kind of seizure. She lied without blinking. The person standing in front of me was a complete stranger. I stood up and said I needed to get some water. I walked into the kitchen. A wave of nausea rose inside me. I looked up at the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was still there, quietly recording everything. The people out there had no idea that every word they spoke, every fake expression on their faces, was being stored as undeniable evidence. Todd followed me into the kitchen. He deliberately stood close to me. He said there was not much time left. He said he had connections who could arrange a room at Golden Oaks as early as tomorrow. I simply nodded. I said I would carefully review the terms. I needed them to believe I was beginning to waver. I needed them to feel victory was within reach, so they would reveal their true nature even more clearly. Because this game had only just begun, and I was the one holding the final verdict. That night I did not sleep. I sat in my dark study. The only light in the room was the cold blue glow from my computer screen reflecting on my face. I took a deep breath and opened the video file saved from the hidden camera inside the smoke detector. The timestamp showed a moment when I was still at the fishing lake. The image was so clear I could see every strand of hair on my own head. But what I saw next shattered my soul. The screen showed Brittany yelling at her mother. She was no longer the sweet daughter I once knew. Her face was twisted with rage. She grabbed Patricia by the shoulders and shook her violently. Patricia was crying. She tried to push Brittany away. Then Todd stepped into the frame. He did not try to stop anything. Instead, he walked forward with a cold smile. He grabbed the tea set from the table and smashed it onto the floor right at Patricia's feet. The dry crack of breaking porcelain echoed through the computer speakers. I saw my wife flinch and curl into herself. Todd bent down. He picked up a sharp piece of porcelain. He held it close to her face. He threatened that if she did not sign the trust documents, she would never see me again. He said he would make her disappear forever into some sterile white room. Then I saw Brittany slap her mother. A brutal slap. She screamed at her, calling her a useless, senile old woman. She said they needed the money to save Todd's career. That was when everything finally made sense. Todd owed the underworld $500,000, a massive financial hole he could never fill, and they had decided to use the blood of their own parents to repay it. But the worst part was still ahead. I watched Brittany open her handbag. She pulled out a bottle. It was Patricia's heart medication. I watched as she dumped every single pill into the trash. Then she replaced them with different pills. I recognized the color immediately. High-dose Xanax. They were poisoning her. They were trying to create fake symptoms of dementia. They wanted to turn her into a truly unstable person, so they could easily control the family assets. In my world, numbers do not lie. But people do. Never believe what someone says. Believe what they do when they think no one is watching. If you feel anger for the innocent wife in this story, press like right now to spread this message. Justice must be served, and I need your support. I turned off the screen. I sat there in silence, surrounded by darkness. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest. This betrayal was no longer just a financial matter. This was a systematic murder plot. The people I once called my children had turned into predators stalking inside their own home. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer shaking. A deadly calm had settled over me. A forensic accountant knows that when you uncover a major fraud, you cannot alert the criminals too soon. You must collect enough evidence until the guilty have no path left to escape. They thought I was just an old man who could be easily manipulated. They thought my clumsiness, my spilled coffee, and my confusion were real. They had no idea they had just signed the death sentence for their own future. I will not only send them to prison, I will make them pay with the two things they desire most: money and reputation. This criminal audit has only reached the halfway point, and what comes next will be the worst nightmare they have ever experienced. I held Patricia's pill bottle in my hand. The pale blue Xanax tablets lay still inside like bullets already loaded into a chamber. Brittany and Todd believed they had succeeded. They thought the drowsiness and sluggishness of my wife were simply signs of old age. But I knew better than anyone. This was a poison audit. Every pill they forced her to swallow was a negative entry in the balance sheet of her life. I felt a cold wave of anger run down my spine. I walked into the bathroom and closed the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back at me belonged to a man who had spent 30 years protecting justice for others, yet somehow allowed demons to grow under his own roof. I took out my phone and photographed the bottle. I needed evidence. In the forensic world, if you do not have images or documents, the truth becomes nothing more than a worthless rumor. Quietly, I replaced Patricia's real heart medication. I watched her sleeping. Her face looked exhausted, worn down by emotional torment. I swore to myself that this would be the last time she ever had to endure such cruelty. I began connecting the pieces. Todd's $500,000 debt was not some random miscalculation. It was the result of greed and gambling. He was using my wife as a sacrifice for his own stupidity. The next morning, Brittany walked into the room carrying a glass of water. She looked at me with carefully rehearsed concern. She asked whether I had thought about signing the power of attorney papers. She said we needed to move quickly to handle the arrangements at Golden Oaks. I looked directly into her eyes. I saw urgency. I saw hunger for power. I saw a stranger occupying my daughter's body. I pretended to sigh. I told her I felt tired, that my memory had not been very good lately. A flash of excitement lit up Brittany's eyes. Victory. She believed their plan was working on both of us. What she did not realize was that I was weaving a massive net, and she was the prey willingly walking into its center. I went downstairs and saw Todd standing in the corner speaking on the phone. He was talking about a payment scheduled for the following week. He promised everything would be resolved once the paperwork was signed. He was selling us out. He was selling my entire life to buy his own freedom. I sat down on the sofa and picked up a newspaper, but my mind was scanning through federal statutes. I began listing the charges: elder abuse, poisoning, conspiracy to seize assets, and possibly money laundering. I would not stop at simply protecting Patricia. I was going to destroy their entire world. I would make them understand that the greatest miscalculation of their lives was underestimating Douglas Mercer. Todd turned back toward me. I smiled at him. the smile of a man about to execute the largest financial purge in this family's history. I told them to arrange a meeting at Todd's office the following week. I said I would sign everything, because I needed a stage large enough for the final act to be perfect, and Millennium Tower would be the place where every betrayal finally came to an end. Brittany and Todd could not wait any longer. They brought a stack of asset authorization documents worth $4 million straight to the house. They placed it on the dining table like a death sentence for my freedom. Todd handed me an expensive gold pen. He urged me to sign immediately so he could deliver the paperwork to the lawyer that afternoon. Brittany stood beside me, massaging my shoulders. She said all I had to do was sign my name and all my worries would disappear. I looked down at the papers. It was a garbage contract. It stripped every bit of financial control away from me and Patricia. I could see Todd sweating beneath his tailored suit. He was thinking about the $500,000 debt that was coming due. I deliberately let my hands shake violently. I muttered about not being able to see the words clearly. I acted like an old man standing on the edge of confusion. I held a cup of thick black coffee in my hand. I pretended to reach for the pen and deliberately spilled the entire cup across the documents. The dark liquid soaked into every page. Brittany screamed in horror. Todd cursed loudly and lunged forward trying to save the papers. But it was too late. The numbers and legal terms were now nothing but smeared black stains. I looked at them with a confused, apologetic expression. I said I was sorry for my clumsiness. I said perhaps my eyes really had grown weak. Todd clenched his teeth. He stared at me with pure contempt but forced himself to remain calm. He said it was fine, and he would print another copy. But I quickly interrupted him. I said I felt far too tired today. Instead, I suggested we hold a meeting next week at Todd's office in Millennium Tower. That was the trap. I needed them out of my house immediately. I needed 1 week to prepare the final performance. Todd looked at Brittany and nodded. They believed I had completely lost control. They believed victory was only a matter of time. They had no idea that the spilled coffee was a precise calculation inside my plan. After they left, I immediately began cleaning up the scene. I pulled out the second phone I had kept hidden. I started installing tracking software into Todd's company accounts, which I still had remote access to. I am a forensic accountant. I know how to find dirty money faster than almost anyone. What I discovered was worse than I expected. Todd was not only in debt. He had been using my company credit cards to fund his luxury lifestyle. Every transaction that appeared on the screen became another piece of solid evidence. He was spending my money to fuel his own betrayal. My patience was running thin, but I knew I had to wait. A perfect audit requires precision down to the second. I returned to the bedroom and looked at Patricia. She was more alert now that I had replaced her real heart medication. I held her hand tightly and whispered, "Trust me. Just 1 more week. In 7 days, every one of them will be kneeling at your feet. I will not only recover the money, I will restore the honor of this family. Those who believe a stack of documents can steal our lives will soon realize the greatest mistake they ever made. They chose to stand against Douglas Mercer." Todd thought he had already won when I agreed to come to his office. He believed I was just an extra number waiting to be erased. But he forgot one thing. I had spent my entire life tracing people far greedier than him. So I began the real audit of his private life. I followed the transactions from the secondary credit card I had once given him. The numbers started to move and they told a completely different story. He was not only in debt to the underworld, he was using my money to build another home. I traced the charges from luxury restaurants and expensive jewelry purchases. Every trail led to a penthouse apartment in the center of the city. I sat in my old car across the street from the building, holding a pair of binoculars, waiting. Patience is the sharpest weapon a forensic accountant possesses. At 7 o'clock sharp, Todd stepped out of his car, but he was not alone. Walking beside him was a young woman about Brittany's age. His arm wrapped around her waist with an intimacy I had never once seen him show my daughter in the past 3 years. I watched him hand her a key. The key to the luxury apartment he planned to buy with the money he intended to steal from my wife's trust fund. A surge of electricity ran down my spine. This betrayal had gone far beyond anything I had calculated. He did not just want the money. He planned to send his mother-in-law to a state mental institution and deceive my daughter while beginning a new life with his mistress. Todd was a parasite draining my family to the last drop. I pulled out my phone and recorded everything. Every embrace, every kiss, every piece of proof of his moral decay. I wondered how Brittany would react when she discovered that the man she had joined forces with to destroy her parents was already preparing to discard her like a squeezed lemon peel. That is the cruel irony of fate. Those who betray are always betrayed by their own allies. I felt no pity for Brittany. She chose to stand beside that devil. She could descend into hell with him. I remained in the car for another hour. Then I reviewed all the files on my computer. I had everything. The video of the assault from the hidden camera, the evidence of the medication swap, and now proof of the affair and the misuse of company funds. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a complete federal criminal case. I drove home through the suffocating silence of the night. Brittany was sitting on the porch when I arrived. She waved at me with her usual artificial smile. I smiled back. The smile of a hunter who has just watched the prey walk directly into the trap. I told her I was looking forward to tomorrow's meeting at Millennium Tower. That night I opened the drawer and checked the old gun inside. Not because I intended to use it, but because it reminded me that justice sometimes demands ruthless resolve. I was not only going to bankrupt Todd, I was going to erase him from the social map entirely. Tomorrow's meeting would contain no signatures, only verdicts and overdue regret. The truth was counting down the hours before it exploded. Millennium Tower rose high above the center of the city, its glass walls reflecting both glamour and cold indifference. I stepped out of my car with a cane in my hand. I deliberately wore an old suit that hung a little too loose on my body. I wanted to look like a weak prey stumbling into a tiger's den. But inside the pocket of my jacket was a recording device already running. And inside my mind was a plan timed down to the millisecond. Todd greeted me in the lobby with a victorious smile. He led me to the executive elevator. As we rode up, he talked proudly about the supposed success of his company. What he did not know was that I understood his balance sheet better than he did. When the office door on the 40th floor opened, Brittany was already waiting. She wore an elegant business suit, but her eyes could not hide her impatience. On the polished mahogany desk sat another stack of asset authorization papers. And this time there was no coffee to spill. The air in the room smelled of pure greed. Todd pushed a leather chair toward me and said we needed to finish this quickly because Patricia was waiting at the care facility. I froze. I asked where Patricia was. Todd smiled cruelly. He said that for her own safety they had already taken her to Golden Oaks earlier than planned. This was their final pressure move. They were holding my wife hostage to force my signature. My chest tightened with fear for Patricia, but I knew I could not collapse now. One mistake would destroy everything I had prepared. I glanced around the office. 2 men in black suits stood by the door. They were not office staff. They were debt collectors from the underworld. Todd had become so desperate that he brought criminals into his office to supervise this transaction. Brittany stepped closer and handed me the pen. She whispered that if I signed, we could all go pick up Mom together. Her lie flowed smoothly, like a carefully fabricated financial report. I looked down at the document. $4 millions. 30 years of sweat and sacrifice. Security for Patricia and me in our old age. And now the 2 people standing in front of me wanted to swallow it whole without a trace of conscience. I placed my hand on the paper. Then I looked up at the large television screen mounted on the office wall. Todd asked what I was looking at. I said I wanted to verify a few things before signing. From my pocket I pulled out a USB drive. I told Todd it contained a list of secret savings accounts that I wanted to merge into this joint fund. Todd's eyes lit up immediately. Without hesitation, he plugged the USB into the central computer. He had no idea it was not an account list. It was a program I had designed to seize control of the building's entire presentation system. I took a slow breath. I looked at Brittany one last time. I saw excitement in her eyes. I saw betrayal that had completely devoured her humanity. The trap had been triggered. Numbers began to appear on the screen. But they were not bank balances. They were federal records, surveillance footage, and legal evidence pulling from multiple systems, including the cameras at Golden Oaks and Todd's private financial files. The countdown had begun. In just a few minutes, Millennium Tower would become the courtroom where their crimes were judged. I held the pen in my hand. not to sign, but to wait for the moment when the truth would explode and burn everything down. And if you have stayed with this story until this moment, do one small thing. Subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing. Sometimes giving even the smallest thing can make your day a little better. Todd stared at the computer screen with eager excitement. He was waiting for the secret account numbers to appear and satisfy his hunger for money. But instead of account balances, the 60-inch television in the conference room suddenly flickered and displayed a blazing red message, assessing fraudulent financial transactions. The smile on Todd's face froze. He frantically clicked the mouse, but the keyboard had already been completely disabled. I placed the gold pen on the table and slowly stood up. The cane was no longer my only support. I looked straight into Brittany's eyes. Her face had turned pale as the footage from the hidden camera in my kitchen began playing on the screen. The video showed her slapping her mother. It showed Todd holding a sharp shard of porcelain to Patricia's face and threatening her. Every detail was crystal clear. The two men from the underworld standing by the door exchanged uneasy glances. They realized this was not an ordinary signing meeting. The screen changed again. Now it showed Todd embracing his mistress in the penthouse apartment. Brittany stared at the screen in disbelief. Her eyes widened with shock. She turned toward Todd with absolute disgust. Todd stammered, trying to explain, but the next images destroyed any chance he had. Bank statements appeared on the screen showing that he had secretly withdrawn hundreds of thousands of dollars from my company credit cards to support his mistress. I picked up the authorization document. Instead of signing it, I took a red marker and wrote across the paper, "Money laundering violation under Title 18 United States Code." Then I began reading the legal charges out loud. Elder abuse. Conspiracy to seize assets. Federal financial fraud. I spoke with the calm voice of a man delivering judgment. In my ledger, every crime must eventually be settled with freedom. Brittany completely lost control. She lunged at Todd, clawing and screaming at him. She shouted that he was a traitor, that she had sacrificed her own parents to help him, and this was how he repaid her. The elegant conference room turned into a battlefield of hatred. Todd shoved her aside and tried to rush toward me to grab the USB drive. But before he could take a single step, the office door burst open. FBI agents stormed in with weapons drawn. They were not there because I had just called them. They were there because I had already sent the full file of evidence about Todd's money laundering to a former colleague a week earlier. Todd and Brittany were forced to the floor. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I stepped closer to Todd and bent down beside him. Quietly, I whispered in his ear, "Your biggest miscalculation was not your debt to the underworld. It was believing that a former FBI forensic accountant would never audit his own home." I retrieved the USB drive and turned away. I did not look back at Brittany even as she screamed my name. For me, they had already died the moment they laid their hands on Patricia. Never underestimate a man who has spent his life decoding lies. If you believe every betrayal must eventually be paid for in cold cash and years behind bars, leave a comment saying "amazing." And subscribe to follow the emotional ending and the painful lesson about family that comes next. I walked out of Millennium Tower. The cold wind blew across the street, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I took out my phone and called the police officers waiting at Golden Oaks. I told them to bring Patricia home immediately. The audit was over. The numbers had balanced. The crimes had received their verdict. And now it was time for me to go pick up the only woman who still meant everything in my life. In the ledger of Douglas Mercer, there were finally no debts left unpaid. The lights of Millennium Tower slowly faded in my rearview mirror. I drove straight to Golden Oaks, but not to leave someone there. I went to bring my wife home. When I saw Patricia standing in the lobby with swollen eyes, I held her tightly in my arms. I whispered that everything was over. The demons had been locked in their cages. Justice often arrives late, but it is always as precise as a mathematical equation. Todd received a 15-year prison sentence for money laundering and conspiracy to seize assets. Brittany received 8 years for aiding the crime and abusing an elderly person. When I stood in court, I did not look at them even once. To me, those names had already been crossed out from the ledger of my life. I used the recovered money and sold the mansion filled with painful memories. I bought back the house that had been confiscated from my daughter, but I did not live there. Instead, I turned it into Mercer Haven, a center dedicated to supporting and protecting elderly people who suffer from abuse. I wanted to transform a place that once held betrayal into a fortress of kindness. That was my way of making up for my failure in the past. Now Patricia and I sit beside the quiet lake every afternoon. There are no hidden cameras anymore. No poisoned pills. Only the sound of the wind and the peace we finally deserve. I realize something important. Family is not the blood running through your veins. DNA is not a binding contract. Family is the people who hold your hand when the world turns its back on you. Thank you for being among the first to stay until this moment. Leave a comment with the number 1 if you do not see anyone else writing it yet. Write number 2 if you see a number 1 below. Write number 3 if you see a number 2, and keep it going, so I can know exactly how many people listen to this story all the way to the end. I will read every comment. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next video. Take care of yourself, and remember to protect the people who truly love you. I look down at the calm surface of the lake. The numbers in my mind have finally reached perfect balance. My total wealth is no longer measured in dollars. It is measured in Patricia's smile and the quiet peace inside my heart. The final audit is complete, and the result is a new life rising from the ruins of betrayal. Justice has been served. Peace has returned.